Defining popular political labels and the failures thereof. Political labels are used by people to align or distance themselves with entire movements, but one feature of modern political discourse seems to be the willingness people have to either employ or identify with political labels without knowing the ideology behind the label. This, of course, leads to confusion in political discourse, where the descriptive political term is conflated with the colloquial insult. This poor understanding is multiplied by media entities that intentionally use political labels as thought-terminating cliches. The most popular political labels should be properly defined to foster understanding, but the policies that undergird these political labels should be regarded as much more important and should be the primary focus of all voters. In today's polarized political environment, the first labels that one may encounter or use themselves are left-wing and right-wing. These terms originated in pre-revolution France during 1789. Those who supported the monarchy would sit on the right of the French National Assembly Hall, while those who opposed him sat on the left. Newspapers would spread the concepts of the progressive left and traditionalist right, and then, after becoming common parlance in France, would spread to the United States. Something that should be recognized is that, in the original case of the French Revolution and in the case of today, liberal is not the opposite of conservative. For example, one of the people who disagreed with the revolutionaries on the left was Irish conservative Edmund Burke, who agreed with the ideas of liberalism but not with the society-changing process of revolution. As in the case with Burke, conservatism developed as a response to the left wing of the French Assembly, which wanted radical change and a departure from tradition, but is distinctly separate from their counterparts in the right wing, who were loyalists to absolute monarchy. He specifically believed that prioritizing theory over tradition was a dangerous way to build society. Consequentially, the label was adopted by Tories in England and made its way from Britain to the United States. First, it was held by the Democrats, who opposed the massive social change caused by the abolition of slavery and the expansion of the federal government. Then it was claimed by the Republicans, who opposed business regulations, which were set in place by progressive presidents, who were, funnily enough, mostly Republicans. Liberalism is a political philosophy that is mostly attributed to John Locke, who believed that the government should serve the people. Specifically, Locke rejected the divine right of kings by arguing that government should operate under the consent of the governed through a social contract that recognizes and preserves man's natural state of freedom. The framers of the Constitution adopted these ideas and invoked them in the Declaration of Independence. They went on further to design the country around liberalism, imbuing the Constitution with its ideals. Therefore, in the United States, conservatives are liberals to the same degree that liberals are liberals. Some conservatives, like libertarians, describe themselves as classical liberals. The real opposite, if such a thing exists, of conservatism is progressivism. In the early 20th century, American history is defined by what is called the Progressive Era. Progressivism took liberalism one step further. Instead of only serving the people through domestic defense and the preservation of individual rights, the government should also provide for the well-being of its citizens through the regulation of companies and strong welfare. Further, that welfare should be funded by a tax on individual income, which increases in higher tax brackets. Teddy Roosevelt was the first progressive president and had an aggressive stance towards what he called corporate malefactors. He would develop some of the first building blocks of the modern regulatory state. Taft went even further with antitrust than Theodore Roosevelt was willing to. Then, Woodrow Wilson, a progressive Democrat, would ensure the ratification of the 16th Amendment, which enshrined the individual tax system. Franklin D. Roosevelt built the modern welfare state, primarily in the form of Social Security. He further redefined liberalism by expanding the ideology to include his policies, which polarized conservatives against the term and led to the equivocation of liberal with progressive. Many conservatives today call the policies that define and support public welfare socialist, But the truth is that progressive liberalism was the United States' response to real socialism. Theodore Roosevelt, towards the end of his second administration, said during a speech regarding his progressive policies that certain socialistic leaders proposed to redistribute the world's goods. He was principally against socialism, and the reason why was clear: American industry. Socialism, in its simplest terms, is the collective ownership and distribution of property. Socialists before liberalism are commonly referred to as utopian socialists. Marxist socialism is a critique and a reaction to capitalism and liberalism. Though it originated from Marx as a type of state which was meant to be a transitional stage before reaching communism, a stateless society, it finds its place in the modern world as its own end in itself. An important distinction between socialism and progressive liberalism are the notions of collective ownership, which is what Roosevelt warned against in his progressive speeches, and redistribution of wealth. Progressive liberals support the taxation and regulation of large corporations, but prefer to maintain competitive markets between companies, which makes them capitalists. Socialists prefer nationalization, when the state operates an industry, and sometimes even worker cooperatives, which are companies with shared ownership between workers, and are ideologically anti-capitalist. Some argue that the welfare state is synonymous with socialism, but that fails to recognize the stated anti-socialist purpose of the progressives like Teddy Roosevelt, to provide comfort to workers while preserving capitalism. Another label often conflated with socialism is fascism. This is usually because the German fascist Nazis called themselves National Socialists. The Nazis, however, chose this label to bleed support from the traditional Socialist Democratic Party of Germany, which they banned once gaining power. While they weren't socialists, they were definitely fascist. Fascism is an ultra-nationalist philosophy which endows the state with ultimate authority, and is a response to both liberalism and socialism, whereby private industry exists, but under strict observation of the government. Fascist states usually set limits on imports in order to promote national self-sufficiency, which make them reliant on militarism and conquest. Another feature of fascism is the rooting out of internal enemies, either real or imagined, as a way to strengthen the nation. Some argue Donald Trump is a fascist, but while this may be a big deal to some people, the dilution of these political terms has rendered such a description without meaningful impact. Whether one finds the description of fascist or socialist offensive would depend entirely on whether they actually align with that perspective. For example, when President Trump spoke to Mayor-elect Zohran Mamdani in November 2025,
he asked about your comment calling the president a fascist, and your answer was, both President Trump and I have been clear about our positions and our views. Mm-hmm. Are you affirming that you think President Trump is a fascist?
I've spoken about...
That's okay, you can just say yes.
Okay, all right.
Okay. It's easier. It's easier than explaining it. I don't mind.
Mr. President, I wanted to ask you also...
He expressly said, "You can call me it," after a reporter asked how the president felt about Mamdani accusing the president of being a fascist. It doesn't actually offend him, and not many people actually know what it means. The same applies to accusations of socialism towards Mamdani, who believes in democratic socialism. While it may have been more impactful after the terrors of the Holocaust caused by fascism was witnessed by Americans who sacrificed their family and bodies, and where the survivors of war would never allow the rise of a fascist president, the label of fascist means next to nothing nowadays. The accusation of socialist means just as little in a world 30 years after the fall of the Soviet Union and the victory of capitalism in the Cold War. Even the sources used for this paper vary slightly enough in their definitions of these terms as to cause confusion to those unfamiliar with modern political history. Certainly, what matters most is the policy that the ideology preaches. When a policy is suggested by a political operative, it should be critiqued on its merits rather than the merits of the person positing it. For example, when discussing public health care, people usually get hung up on the political ideology it represents, liberal, socialist, or the politician endorsing it, like Obamacare, rather than the function of the policy itself. If people focused on discussing policies instead of arguing over political labels, the political environment would be healthier, less confusing, and would have more capacity for meaningful discourse. Thank you for watching.